Welcome, everybody. And our topic today is communicating in contentious times. But more importantly, happy St. Patrick's Day.
Top of the morning.
Especially since we have this young Irish lady who's part of our presenting team today.
I have my scarf on, Don.
Okay, so next one. These are challenging times, and we have found many of our clients have had employee communications or behavior issues in the last couple of months. Most of us experienced some behavioral or communications challenges. You can look to the pandemic, which we hope is easing, but still there. A difficult international situation with the war of Ukraine, tough economic times and inflation, high cost of gas, other things that are wearing on many of us. And then there's the political climate in our country. So we're not sure exactly what is causing this, but it seems that people have a shorter fuse or reacting more emotionally now than they have in past years. Our goal today is to suggest some tools to help understand and deal with those we work with and whose performance is successful, so essential to your team's success.
Don, I'd like to talk about why is this so difficult? Why is it such a difficult time? Well, understandably so, 90% of us have felt emotionally or physically unsafe during these past 2 years. And I'm sure I'm not the only one in the CalWorks safety team or our team of clients that felt like that. There's a failure or an inability to listen. It's a huge problem. We're increasingly aware of cultural differences. We all know we have different backgrounds, we've got different life experiences. But the attitude and the ego of everyone during this contentious time is probably one of the most concerning things. Many of us, we just refuse to admit we're even part of the problem, or we want things our way. Bias does exist. You may hear someone say to you, "Oh, I have no biases." Now, every one of us has some sort of biases, even when we're not aware of the source of our feelings or our opinions. How do we communicate with others? Well, we certainly communicate verbally, but only 35% of our communication is verbal. Believe it or not, nonverbal communication takes up 65% of our communication with others. Your nonverbal communication tells exactly how you're feeling, sometimes even what you're thinking, your facial expressions, your tone of voice, your movements with your hands, your head, etc. Your appearance, appearing on a business Zoom call with your pajamas and your bunny slippers on. Your eye contact. Some people say, you know, I knew something was wrong because he wouldn't look me in the eye. Maybe he was too intimidated to look you in the eye. Your gestures and your posture. You see people many times sitting in a meeting, they don't want to be there. They don't even realize that they're slouched in their chair, they got their arms crossed, and there no way are they going to allow any kind of information into their head at this meeting. So verbal and nonverbal communications play an important part. Don.
Okay, so one of the things that happens is if we're not aware that people are signaling or by their behavior sending us messages, we may be focused on our own problems or issues and not aware of what people are saying by what they're saying or doing. So examples of this are when people are just silent or avoid the problem. Problems don't go away because we don't talk about them. And in some cases, people will interpret things worse than if we actually did talk about it. Or if you notice the same problem is occurring time after time after time, something's going on that you need to be aware of and pay attention to. This is particular in case, for example, of people who are habitually late to work or miss work. that behavior isn't going to change unless it's addressed and dealt with. Also, some people are just rude and brusque or appear to be insensitive to others, and we'll have a case example of that today. People aren't aware of how they are. And when we talk about nonverbal communication, being interested in others, open in others, smiling at others, makes it a lot easier to have communications. There are also people I'm sure you've run into who are passive on the surface, acquiescive, but on the backside are aggressive and are attacking or undermining what you're trying to do. So don't just assume that surface behaviors are an accurate reflection of what people are thinking. Then there's the yes, but. So these are people who yes, but probably isn't a yes. Obviously, you need to listen and depend on the circumstances. But many cases, this would be like, well, I told the person to do such and so, and they said yes, but it was really not a yes. I was taught by a trainer a long time ago, you can ask the question, is that really a yes? Because we need to make sure we have accurate understanding of others.
There's also a kernel of truth, Don, in the actions of others.
Yeah, so something that they're doing is really communicating a message. And so when we're talking about weak signals, we're suggesting that you make the effort to understand why they're doing and what their behavior really is telling you. Okay. So in interpersonal relationships, one of the things that helps is if you understand the type of problem that you're dealing with. And so one of the questions you can ask yourself is this an issue of ability of the person who I'm working with, or is this a motivational issue? Is the problem that they don't know what to do or how to do it, or have the resources to do it, or if they just don't want to do it? Because obviously you solve these problems differently. You can deal with a ignorance or ability problem, but often people are disagreeable or reluctant because they don't have the information or ability to respond. They don't want to tell you that. But unless you address that, you're not going to be able to make progress. Ability issues can generally be helped with training, encouragement, and support to the other person. On the other hand, behavioral issues are internal to the other person. And I'm sure you've had this experience, if not with employees, maybe with teenage children. You can tell them what you want them to do, but they are going to decide whether they're going to react or not. Employees are the same. So if the behavior is the problem, we need to understand it and seek to find ways to respond. But just ordering people to change doesn't work very well.
I've got an example, Don. I'd like to share it with you.
Yes.
I had a situation where a new manager, her name was Beth, and she was promoted to the manager of service technicians at an equipment company. And she'd been there for 5 years and she was well deserving of the manager spot. So she decided that what she really needed to do was to institute a weekly call with each of her 2 supervisors and each one of her 6 technicians. She thought it would be good to review their workload, who their customers, how they're doing, any equipment issues they might have, and other general kinds of items maybe that they wanted to review. So it's Monday morning at 10 o'clock, and Carl is on the first call to have this session with her. So she brings Carl up. Carl, this is Beth. I'm calling for our weekly update call, and I'm so happy we're going to be working together.
Beth, I know this is all new to you, but this is a expletive bad time to have these calls. I am expletive drowning on Mondays. Call me Wednesday when I'm a free man.
The line went dead. So how are we going to help with this problem? Don, how would you help Beth?
Well, first of all, I'd listen to what Carl said. he said this is a bad time,
Yeah, you said a lot of bad stuff too.
but he did say it was a bad time. So one of the questions is, when should you schedule the call? And it doesn't hurt to ask people, when's a good time for us to do this? Now, Beth may have had other duties, but a check-in call could happen early in the week, or it could be a last day of the week. It could be any time. It's great to have the check-in, but one of the things you can do is say, have an understanding and an expectation. This is when we're calling, and we both understand this is a time for us to talk.
How would I help Carl? I think that the first thing that's important for Beth to do is to acknowledge the behaviors that she heard when she was talking to Carl for the first time. It was obvious that Carl was not happy with the time of the call and the day of the call. Maybe he had some legitimate reasons to be that upset. Maybe he really did have some serious problems going on that he felt were more important than sitting on a call with his new manager.
He might have been jealous that she got the job and he didn't.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Beth, it's important that Beth talks to Carl about his responses to her on the call. One of them, of course, hanging up on her, and discussing the unacceptable communications that he gave to her as well. I would advise her to at first listen to Carl's responses very closely and get as much feedback from him as she can to understand where he's coming from and what the issues are. But she does definitely need to sit with Carl to explain to him and get him to understand that what the correct messages should have been from him, and to make them clear that, to make her messages clear that she's the manager now. She wants to work well with him. She wants the team to be productive and enjoy working together as a team.
I'd say another part of this is, and this has probably happened to almost all of us, somebody does something that pushes our button or gets our emotions running, which certainly Carl's behavior could have done.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, we are in HR or in management or as a supervisor, we're charged, or our job is to get results out of the people we work with and who work for us. So we've got to be able to put our emotions aside, even if it means counting to 10 before you respond, and realize it's not about you, it's about them and what happened, and try to react more on a rational or an analytical basis than just letting your buttons be pushed. And I say this as somebody who, people who know me, have had my buttons pushed more than once.
Absolutely. Don's going to talk about common behaviors.
Okay, so there are lots of ways that people do things that affect our communications. One of them is withdrawal, where they simply don't talk. Now, often this is a relief. We're happy to have them leave us alone, but we need to realize our job is to get results out of the people who work with us and for us. And we need to pursue that in a persistent, optimistic way to involve the person, because we won't know what they're thinking or why they're doing what they're doing unless we ask. We often can fill in the blanks and make assumptions, but we need to know. Another thing is masking, and this is where people say things, but it's really not about the problem they have. They're masking by talking about something else. And this is often the case when people have maybe legitimate complaints about hostile treatment from coworkers or even bosses, family problems, emotional problems, change. People don't like change. So one of the tasks is, and there's an old adage, somebody used to talk about 5 whys. You'd ask the question several times to peel away like layers of an onion, what's really the underlying reason or behavior of the person, not just what they're throwing up as kind of a deflection or as a protection device. Avoidance is kind of the same thing, only this is more of a problem for employers, in that we realize problems almost never get better by avoiding them. It's nice to avoid them, and there's a lot of other things that we need to do in our day. But you need to understand, again, the bottom line. If our job is to get results of the people we work with and supervise, avoidance is not a helpful tactic, or by either side, by the employee or the supervisor. Then there are those, and I'm sure you've had them. In a sense, this is kind of what Carl was
Yeah,
doing,
Carl was
trying
absolutely.
to just control the other person. And when this happens, then the person they're working with automatically has this natural defense. And this goes back to even childhood, when your mother asked you to take out the trash and you pretended not to hear it because you didn't want your mother to control you. Well, that was a long time ago. But we need to understand being open and listening is a good tactic to deal with this issue of control.
On this last item you're going to talk about, this
Yeah.
definitely was what Carl was doing, I think.
The other thing is, and I'm sure you've seen it, and we've had instances in the last couple of months for a number of our clients where employees are attacking or saying things. In fact, in one client, there was an alleged sexual harassment circumstance, and the employee, two coworkers were talking, young male, young female, and the girl complained to the boy, and he got and threw his wallet at the girl. That's attacking in more than just a verbal fashion.
Mhm.
And she wouldn't give the wallet back. So that then led to intervention by management and a serious problem of behavior. Maybe it was consensual flirting and banter to start with, but it turned ugly in a real quick hurry. And companies can't afford to have that kind of outward behavior because it impacts everybody around them, coworkers as well as the people involved.
Mhm. Don, this slide, we want to talk about and make you familiar with the most effective ways for you to communicate. When you're deciding that Beth decided she needed to speak with Carl, she probably did it, and she did on a one-on-one basis. But other times you might want to use an open meeting. It's important to evaluate the situation, what you need to talk about, and what would be the best way to communicate one-on-one or in an open meeting. Normally, open meetings are very valuable because, first of all, everyone is in the meeting and they're all getting the message at the same time. It's not where you find in one-on-one meetings, you tell one person something, they leave the meeting and they go out and tell somebody, but maybe they elaborate on it or they leave out important things. So always evaluate which way you want to communicate when you're going to talk one-on-one, or is an open meeting probably the best thing to use. Sometimes people use emails. Sometimes people use emails because they want to hide behind them.
Mhm.
They don't want to face the person, so that I'm sending him an email. In the situation with Carl, I don't think sending Carl an email would be productive.
Part of the email is a couple of techniques that are helpful. First of all, draft your email, but read it before you hit the send button, because is this really what you want to say? Also, be careful about reply alls or the message tail, because sometimes emails could have been a very short 2 or 3 sentences, but it's appendage to a whole string of emails that have led up to that circumstance. And we're rehashing problems and being careful. And the other part is being careful about reply all. Who needs to know this message and who should get it? Emails can still be a quick way to either make inquiries or respond promptly, but it's a tool that can be misused just as easily as it can be used correctly.
Training, of course, is an important way to communicate. Presentations like we're doing today, giving you information that it's going to help you with these contentious kinds of situations that you're encountering with your employees and maybe with other managers. But training and presentations are a very useful way, because during trainings and sometimes with presentations, visual things are helpful to the audience in training. Handouts, things that they can take with them to refer to later on, are also important.
And visuals are important because realize people have different learning styles. And there are people who learn by listening. And there are people who learn better by seeing. So if you have a way to visually present the message, you increase the chances that the person will understand and follow on. Also, if you're having a difficult discussion or some kind of potential confrontation, it may be better to have a document, a memo, or a letter so that the emotions can be directed at the letter instead of at the person who's giving the message. Also, you're accurate and it's consistent, and you have a record of what you said.
Absolutely. I think tone is important too.
Mhm.
The tone that you have in your meeting. If you start the meeting with a very stern voice, you're going to set the mood for the meeting.
Mhm.
But if you're friendly, approachable, warm, and using soft tones, the person's not going to be as intimidated with the meeting as if you went the other way and used some sternness in your presentation.
Humor is a good tool, but it's kind of a two-edged sword. You want to make sure that the communication is legitimate and serious and appropriate, but also just as smiling and so on, a soft answer can turn away wrath. I think that's an Irish saying, but if it isn't, it should be. But if there's an opportunity to lighten the mood, it also can help lower people's resistance and let them hear what you're really saying.
It always bothers me when somebody's mumbling, Don, because I think I'm the only one that can't understand what the person is saying. I don't want to embarrass the person by saying, could you speak up? I can't hear what you're saying. So don't mumble. Be direct. Keep your voice at a tone that can be heard. And of course, mumbling under your breath probably is not a good thing either.
Probably the most important lesson, if there's one out of all today's session, it's listen. Many of us have a whole lot of life experiences and we have expectations. And if we start by dealing with others by what we, quote, already know, we're going to be limited in our effectiveness. It's never wrong to start with a question and try to obtain what's on the other person's mind. And this is particularly true with contentious or repeat behavior, because there could well be something going on that you didn't know about. If there isn't, it's easy. It's a 3-second time exercise to ask a question and give them a second to answer. I would say another one is people respond to what you expect from them. So if you're confident in yourself and you know you communicate, you're a good person, but we have this problem or concern, you're going to have much better ability to communicate. Some of you may remember a book years ago called I'm Okay, You're Okay, or The 1 Minute Manager, both of which talked about communicating, confronting problems, but also doing it in a way in which you're not awfulizing or making worse the situation.
Acting out your message too, giving the employee maybe some examples of the message that they conveyed to you, and by giving the message back to them, they go, oh, wow, that's not what I meant at all. Acting out the message and showing the employee how you took their words, the way they spoke to you, or maybe their behaviors and how they displayed their body language to somebody, is just like having a visual in a presentation, and it will help the employee to see where there is an issue.
Unnecessary repetition. Now, this is kind of a double-edged sword also, because you want to make sure the person heard and got your message. But if you're saying the same thing over and over again, one of the questions you need to ask yourself is, why is the message not getting across? And is there a better way to do it? And one of the ways to deal with this is to ask the person, did you understand, or what did you understand that I was saying or trying to get across? And listen to how they feed back to you the message. it's better than if you just simply say the message again.
I think watching a person's body language in that situation, if you could see their eyes are starting to glaze over and they're losing their attention, think about, did I already tell him this? Am I repeating this again to him?
And that also applies to telling the same joke time after time.
Yeah. It's not funny anymore. Create a receptive atmosphere, as we talked earlier about, setting the tone, setting the atmosphere of the meeting. If you're having a one-on-one meeting, make sure that it's in a private place, especially if you're going to be talking about performance or a serious situation that's occurred. Being in a private office without a window where people can walk by and peek in and see what's going on you'll be very uncomfortable for the employees. So make sure that you've got a receptive atmosphere that will create a situation where the employee is going to be feeling comfortable to talk to you.
Somebody once said feedback is the breakfast of champions, meaning that you really need to get some feedback. And if people don't volunteer it, there's a question where you can ask questions. Questions are interesting ways to communicate because you can use a question to gain information, but you can also use a question to pass on information. So think about how you'd get the person to give you some response to what's going on or the problem.
The next three items, Don, I think we talked a little bit about body language and how not only you can see what the person is feeling and thinking by their body language, but they can also detect from you your body language. And sometimes using your hands to demonstrate. I use my hands a lot when I'm talking and whatever, and waving them around or whatever, but you need to be careful when you're doing that so that the person isn't starting to feel uncomfortable, because sometimes you get a little out of hand with your hand waving and it gets to be a little intimidating to people.
And the last thing I would say is be appreciative of the other person and where they are. After all, you or someone in your organization hired them and asked them to join your team. If there is a problem of behavior or action, it's not just the person who did it. You brought them in. So appreciate the values of what they do contribute, how they are good if they're away, even if there are some behaviors or communications that are wrong, what is also going on that is right and that's helpful, is that'll put things into perspective and make the communications be more effective.
There's some things here, Don, that I guess the best way for me to explain them is don't do this. Don't have racially biased comments or language, and your employees shouldn't be using it either. Off-color jokes. If you hear that stuff going on, or you are a witness to an employee giving this kind of verbal talk, you need to jump on it right away and take care of it, because you ignore this, it's going to create a serious problem down the line, believe me.
Now, it's easy to say crying is an acceptable way to communicate. And it isn't very effective because it tells the observer that the person's emotionally concerned, but not necessarily what they're concerned or upset about. The other problem is some people tend to react more emotionally with crying or fear. Others have a different way of reacting, which is aggression, louder voice, being more demanding. Either one of those are not helpful in terms of getting a point across or communicating. And as somebody once said, there's no crying in baseball.
That's right. That's right. If I see someone that starts crying, I stop and I wait. They are going to settle down and the crying will start, and then I'll start up again. Saying things like, oh, please don't cry. I didn't mean to upset you. That makes them even more upset because now you're buying in on the crying, or that's my interpretation anyway.
Well, I'm a farm boy from Kansas, so I'm not quite sure what sounding uneducated means. But you are a competent manager and an important part of your company. Don't depreciate yourself. Be businesslike and professional in your communication.
Swearing. Once in a while, I understand somebody will say a 4-letter word that's not a real serious swearing word, but it shouldn't become a habit. Nowadays, I see the younger generation, swearing is just like general language now. And in the workplace, sometimes that creates real problems. Also, creates problems between the manager and the employee too. So swearing really needs to be brought down and explain to employees why swearing really isn't something that should be part of their general language.
And a professional, respectful approach to other people in the workplace is always the best course of action. And there are certain people who just kind of automatically go to use of certain profanities. And they need to be called on that and made sure they understand it's harmful and damaging to the relationship and the organization.
This deals mostly with, a lot of times with emails. Don't send unprofessional photos via email. First of all, it's probably violating your email and electronic mail policies that you have in your handbook. Sometimes emails get too personal. Avoid this at all costs.
And we had a client just recently where the manager was going through a difficult time with an illness of their child and was sharing that personal information with their subordinates at work. The problem was there was nothing that the people at work could do about it, and it wasn't related to the production. People undoubtedly have feelings and concerns, but they also need to be aware that we're here respecting each other and talking about business and achieving our company goals and problems at work. And sharing may be a temptation, but it's not helpful.
Inappropriate body language, like giving somebody the finger. I guess there's not much more to say about it than that. Inappropriate should be jumped on right away. Person should be talked to and or advised that this kind of stuff is not professional in the office and it's not going to be tolerated. Mocking, using accents or mocking somebody with a disability or maybe their mannerisms. Again, this can also relate to hostile work environment situations that can develop from this. This is an unkind thing and an unkind behavior that an employee is showing. And again, when you see this kind of situation going on, it's something you really need to jump on right away and address it with the employee. It can be very disheartening to other employees seeing someone mocked or made fun of, and it's something that shouldn't be allowed.
And the last one is violence, threats of violence. I'm going to get you, you're going to pay for this. And this unfortunately does happen, and has happened for some of our clients in the last couple of months. Part of this would be having a consistent policy at your company to prevent violence and physical contact or threats. It should be part of your harassment policy and maybe a separate violence policy, but it needs to be taken seriously because we are all familiar that there have been unfortunate circumstances where the violence breaks out beyond just words to physical contact, fights, even people going out in the parking lot and bringing in a gun. This needs to be taken seriously and dealt with right away and made sure everybody understands that's totally unacceptable behavior.
Don, how about another scenario? Okay, I'm going to let you be the manager this time. So would you like to tell us about Al?
Al was a head of a group of people who install and repair communications equipment on the top of towers and out in the field and mountaintops and so on. It's a stressful job. It can involve traveling to the top of mountains, which is beautiful, but also challenging. Can be a long way from home. And it's dangerous because you can be working with electrical equipment or high altitudes. One of the employees had come to work for the company, but quit to go get a job at Edison because it was a big company that had large, better pay and benefits. But he got laid off by that company and came back to get his job. And he was working, and they put him to work. He was working at a mountaintop when in the middle of the day, he got a text message from Edison saying, come back to work, we want to bring you back right now. And he went to his manager, and I think there's more to click there.
Yeah, I'm going to take the part of Jack,
Okay.
the employee.
All right.
Okay, hey, Yale. I'm on my phone, my cell to you. I'm up on Saddleback over at the Cleveland Tower. Edison just called me. They want me back. And they're going to give me a big raise. I need the money. I need the money, Al. So I'm quitting. But you know what? I need a ride back down the mountain to the station so that I can get my car and get over to Edison.
The problem is, in this case, the guy's car was 45 miles away, and it takes 30 minutes or more to get up and down the mountain.
Is that a problem?
And he went to the work site with the company truck. So the problem is, Jack, you're killing me. Can you work out the rest of the day? I can't have one of our employees take off work, drive you, which would be probably 3 or 4 hours round trip just to get your car. Plus, we need the truck here in case there's an emergency, plus parts and tools are in it. So Jack says, I don't really care.
I need that Edison job.
The challenge for our client, the employer, was that the person can quit if he wants to quit. But the point is, when he quits, if he doesn't want to work out the rest of the day, he's on his own to get off the mountaintop and get back home to get his car, because he cannot demand and expect the employer to do this. Now, this happened to be a relatively young employee, and maybe he didn't understand the expectations. Maybe there wasn't an understanding or an awareness, or maybe he just didn't care. We don't know. Part of the deal is it's easy to get really angry at an employee like this, but you do need to at least tell him what the situation is and what you can and can't do. And at the end of the day, at least if possible, give him some options, like you can walk down the mountain and call Uber, which in fact is what this guy actually ended up doing. But it is appropriate to say, look, I recognize this is an important job for you. Edison doesn't expect you to report to work in 15 minutes because they laid you off before, remember? And you'll be better off finishing the day here and leaving on better terms for our organization.
That's right. Thank you. This next slide is about sending clear messages, Don. And some of them cover things like think before you speak. Sometimes you'll blurt things out and you didn't mean it. How do you take those words back? Yeah. Some other ones, Don, on here?
If you use first person statements, so instead of saying you always do this, you say, look, I'm upset, or I observe, or I'm concerned that you are always late. What's going on? It's a better approach to be able to get communications than simply saying you always, you words are not necessarily helpful in communication. And finger pointing is along the same way, because there's a line between recognizing a real problem and addressing it, which needs to be done, and blaming a person, because blame shuts people down emotionally, shuts them down to respond. Another thing I found sometimes, it helps to practice what you're going to say before you say it, so that when you have the conversation, you're already kind of ready for it. And it's not even a bad idea to make a few notes. And if it's a discipline situation, you can put the notes in your personnel file afterwards as a record of what you actually said.
You know, Don, I think it's important to just be honest with people. Don't try to sugarcoat things. people expect you to be honest with them, and they really do appreciate when you're honest.
Yeah.
So, hey, Don, I want to be honest about what I'm going to be talking to you about. I'm serious about it, and I want to talk to you about it because I've got some things I think could really help you, help me, and help your performance here at the company. And I think using positive language goes along with that. Always shooting negatives at people. I mean, that's a real downer for people. You see people sitting there hanging their heads while they're being berated by a manager. Not a positive word came out of that manager's mouth. Well, you're not going to get any positive stuff back. That's for sure.
There's another lesson from that negative pattern. And that is, if you keep finding yourself having the same conversation with the person, that's a clear message that something's wrong in the communications. They're not responding. They're not willing to respond. You're not getting your message across. The diagnosis of what to do is dependent on the situation. But use that as a clue that there's some different approach that we need to take if we really want to get this problem dealt with.
Mm-hmm. Some more helpful hints about sending clear messages, Don, is providing enough information to the employee. If you're talking to them about maybe low productivity and you've got some reports sitting in front of you and you hand it to them and say, here, I want you to look this over when this meeting is over. Details all of the stats we've had on your production that I'm talking about you today because it's not meeting the goals.
There's another kind of interesting human phenomenon. If we don't tell people the information they need or what's going on, most of the time they'll fill in the blanks with their own imagining of what's going on. And what they imagine is often worse or more harmful than what's the real circumstance.
Right. I think asking for the person's other response and their point of view is probably the second most important thing in communications. You don't know what that person is thinking. You can't get in that person's head, but they've got thoughts. They've got their own ideas. They've got their own judgment about maybe something that happened in their performance or whatever. It's important to find that out because you can't solve the problem if you don't know what the other side is thinking.
Yeah.
So be sure and do that.
Especially in the last few months when emotions are high. And even we might have had our buttons pushed to be emotionally responding as well. So we're mad. And many of you in HR have come to the circumstance where I'm fed up with this employee, let's fire him today. Or we haven't had any warnings, we haven't had any discussions. The manager might have been getting increasingly frustrated. But you need to understand that the other person doesn't know what you know. The only way you can find out what's going on with them is to ask. And the other part is sometimes say, I'm not sure if this is the answer, but what if we try? Or do you have some suggestions that we could try to deal with it? So you're allowing a participation and a buy-in by the other person.
I think also, Don, along with that, tentatively explore issues. I see many times where a manager already has his ideas in his mind as to what happened, why the employee did it, what they were thinking, and they're completely wrong. You get into a meeting with the employee and the employee starts giving their story or their responses and their point of view. Boy, the manager was certainly all praised. So encouraging the other person to come forward with their responses and point of view. Like I said, it's the second most important thing, I think, in communication. You also want to leave on a positive note. Always leave on a positive note. Don't let that employee go out the door with the final words from you being some kind of harsh, maybe demand, some kind of harsh direction to them. End it on a positive note. Hey, we understand that this kind of thing goes on. I hear from you, your side of the story. I understand what you were trying to do with something that you thought would improve the productivity or whatever, but as you can see, it didn't turn out that way. So we don't want you to stop thinking. We want your ideas and we encourage them. So please come to me when you've got them because I want to hear what they are. We've got our last little scenario here to share. And this one is about Oscar. He's a difficult manager. You want to tell us about him?
Okay, Oscar is a plant manager at a manufacturing firm. He reports to the owner, and the owner is often not there, and he's not there now. But problems happen often, and the owner isn't aware of it. Sylvia, who's the office manager, has brought Lizzie in as a new employee to work on a packing line. She introduces this new employee to the other people working on the line, and Rita was working with her and puts her to work along with other people on the assembly.
Well, it was time for break. And so Rita told Lizzie, hey, we're all going on break and you're going to have to cover for us. They leave and they left Lizzie alone on the line. She noticed coming down the assembly line that some of the boxes that she was supposed to be filling were all crinkled. And when she tried to put the product inside the boxes, it just wasn't working. It was a mess. So Lizzie or Rita had told her, hey, if anything goes on, push this button, it'll stop the line. So that's what Lizzie did. She stopped the line. She grabbed some of the crumpled up boxes and she looked around and she saw a man standing over there. And so she walked over to Oscar. And she said to Oscar, excuse me, are you some kind of a boss or something?
And Oscar says, did you stop that line? Now, this is not just a hypothetical.
It's happened.
And this actually happens. And managers and supervisors aren't always having empathy for the workers. Here you have a brand new employee who's doing the best she can. At least you could say, thank you for acknowledging the problem.
Right. Well, Lizzie was scared. Yes, I think something's wrong with these boxes. And she pushed them out in front of her to show them to Oscar.
So Oscar, who's most concerned about keeping the production line going, is give me those and I'll take care of it. And then he went over and made some adjustments. Start to line up and it'll be fine. And the implication is don't bring to me problems, just bring to me solutions. And don't tell me when things aren't right and never touch the machine.
Well, at lunchtime, Sylvia went down finally to the assembly line to find out how Lizzie was doing. And Lizzie told her what happened. And Lizzie says, or Sylvia says to Lizzie, you know, Oscar was a plant manager and he never wants the line stopped, no matter what. Lizzie responded to Sylvia, well, you know, if I knew what he had done to the machine to fix the problem, I think I could have done that myself and I could have fixed it. And Sylvia said, no, nobody touches that line but Oscar or Fred, but Fred's not here right now. He's out sick.
You know, we all in every company have certain unwritten rules of procedure or who does what, or critical issues of production or operations. And if you're a brand new person on your first day, you can have the best of intentions, but we don't want to lose the energy and enthusiasm of that new employee while we're working out this problem.
Well, how are we going to help with this problem? What were the problems with Oscar?
One of the challenges is helping Oscar understand that his job as plant manager is not just machines, it's also people. And people are an essential component and often the most costly part of our whole work process. They need to be treated with respect. And maybe this is after a cup over coffee or some kind of cooperative, helpful approach. But at some point between the owner and Oscar, they need to know best intentions don't work when it's a brusque, perceived as unhelpful behavior. And we had another employee where I just dealt with this week where a office employee said, my boss was yelling at me and it's a hostile work environment. Well, the boss was yelling because of a production mistake, but yelling didn't help get the point across.
Right. You know, there were problems with Sylvia too. I don't think that she knew that Lizzie hadn't been given any training or anything. It seemed like she had a lack of information about whether Lizzie was being trained properly. She had poor behavior toward the employee rather than trying to help the employee. She was more worried about Oscar's behavior and that she had stopped the line.
Yeah, and also just not telling people who the different people at work were and who to go to if you had problems.
Absolutely. I'd also like to give Sylvia some pointers about how you onboard employees, because poor Lizzie was just put out there. And if it was Sylvia's job to do the onboarding, I don't think she did a thorough job about it. And as a result, poor Lizzie, she's withdrawn now. She shut down her communication. Why should I even talk to these people? All they do is raise their voices and they're not giving me any information. And I'm sure she felt pretty intimidated, Don.
One of the interesting things is new employees can be really helpful for improving operations and processes, because people who work at a job day in, day out for weeks or years just tend to accept this is just the way things are. But a new employee comes in and they says, why are we doing it this way? And is there options or whatever? So you want to take advantage of the insights that a new employee can give you to improve your facility.
And you know what I liked about Lizzie? She actually said, you know what, if I was given instructions on, you know, the fiddling around with some of the knobs and stuff on the machinery that Oscar did that fixed the boxes, I think I could do that. That shows a lot of initiative on her part, I think.
Yeah.
So let's look at the tools that everyone can use.
So one of the things that's helpful is to have, when possible, a face-to-face discussion. Now, I realize in working remote and doing telephone conferences and Zooms and so on, this isn't always possible, but it's becoming increasingly possible as we're returning to the workplace. And there's nothing like that face-to-face, because there you're able to communicate with your body language, and you're able to not just what you say, but how the other person's reacting to what you say, and how to make it a complete effective communication.
And I think we covered a number of these on this slide. So let's talk about the solutions for these contentious times, Don. Kind of a recap for the folks. Open communication is always a start key for solutions. That's besides the golden rule of always document. Another golden rule is you got to start with communications with employees or with a manager that you're having issues with. It's really important. We've stressed it a lot this morning about getting information and listening to the employee while you're getting the information. It opens up constructive communication between you and the employee. Without that information, you're just looking at your side of the situation, and it's not going to help. Again, you want to always ask for questions and wait for the responses. Have you ever been in a meeting and someone asks you a question, and before you can even respond, they're on to the next question, or maybe they even answered the question for you? So that's no way to get information. You know, if you're going to ask a question, if they don't answer right away, sit there quietly and wait for their response. Or can I help you? Maybe, did you understand the question? But you're going to get a response by waiting and giving them time. Maybe they're thinking. You want to begin to look at what the problems are and how they can be solved together. Communication isn't just you, it's you and the employee, or if it's another manager that you're having an issue with. You can't solve it by yourself. The reason you don't want to solve it by yourself is because if you don't get buy-in from the other employee that you're talking to, your results are not going to be obtained that you're looking for. There needs to be a consensus between the two parties. And that's with husbands and wives and partners and all that kinds of stuff. Same thing. Just one person coming up with the we're going to do this, and the other party doesn't buy in on it. You're not going to resolve the situation, and it's just going to keep cropping up on and on and on. Don, I think you had a couple here too that you wanted to talk about.
So realize solving problems and communication is a two-way street. The good thing is you recognize and are aware of a problem. That then helps you know we do need to deal with it. But you can't solve the problems on your own because it takes both parties. And so part of the issue is understanding and accepting there's a problem, talking about or dealing with the problem, and then finding things that can be done. Doing the same old thing time after time doesn't lead to improved results, but some changes, tweaks, or whatever can be very helpful. It also shows respect for the employee and tends to encourage them to continue to work for you.
Absolutely. So you want to wrap it up, Don?
Yeah. So realize that we all get our buttons pushed, as I'd like to say, and react. But performance on the job comes from others and doing their job and what it takes for us to have them be able to make the contributions that makes our organization successful. It's important to get past ourselves and realize that the issue is, how do I help the other person become successful?
You know, after all, Don, if we don't, how can others?
So one of the things we'd like to share with you is, this is one of the training programs we have available for managers and supervisors. And we have a variety of other training programs, including listening, dealing with problem employees, dealing with employee conflict, setting goals, setting performance expectations, and getting performance. And so this is a program that's available for you dealing with your own supervisors and managers if it would be helpful. It could be a coffee session or a lunch and learn session or a virtual online training if that's appropriate for the business. We are here to try and help you have a successful business. And I'd also like to say that a month from now, on the 21st of April, our next Zoom session will be on professional employee organizations, or sometimes called PEOs. And part of the question is, what are PEOs? Legally, what are they? And why do companies deal with them? And are they appropriate or helpful for your operation? With that, Jake, we have a few minutes, I think, if there's any questions, but we're almost at the end of our time.
Yes, thank you so much, Don and Pat, for presenting. We have just a couple questions here. If anybody else has any more questions, go ahead and drop those in the chat box. We have one here. Pat, can you please talk again about zero tolerance for inappropriate communication in the workplace? How every manager should address this as it occurs or shortly thereafter in a private setting?
Okay. We advise companies and HR individuals and professionals that you should always start with a policy. It's important that you have a policy in your handbook that outlines what's expected of you, what's expected of your behavior in the workplace, what's expected with your communication and your interaction with coworkers. And that gives the employee a guide as to what the expectations are in the company. Again, you don't want to let situations that you see going on or that are reported to you not handled. I can't tell you how many times I'm asked to help with a situation, and the first thing that I learn from communicating with the HR person or the managers is, well, we kind of knew it was going on, or we thought it would fix itself. Yeah, we had it in our handbook, but this situation was kind of different. We didn't know if it really fit the situation or not. If you've got a policy, it's in your handbook, the employees expect that you're going to follow that policy. If you have a policy of no drugs in the workplace, that's the policy. In the words zero tolerance mean whatever the situation is, whatever the drug is, whatever it is that the employee came to the workplace with or is under the influence of, it's zero tolerance, which means it's going to be handled immediately. It's not going to be brushed aside or ignored in any way. So when you have situations where you have a zero tolerance policy or just a zero tolerance type of policy in your handbook or as a procedure in the company or as even a mission or a vision in the company, you need to adhere to it. Otherwise, it's not worth the paper that's written on. Don, do you have anything
No,
to add?
that's great.
Okay.
Thank you so much for sharing. This is an important topic, and remember, if we didn't address your question today, go ahead and reach out to us at info@calworksafetyhr.com, and be on the lookout for future topics on our website at calworksafety.com. Thank you so much again for sharing, and thank you for joining us. Stay safe, healthy, and have a wonderful day.
Great,
Thank you.
happy St. Patrick's Day.